Welcome to Measurably Better Learning, the podcast built for learning and development professionals. Whether you're an instructional designer, L&D professional, or corporate leader, get ready for insights and ideas that will transform your approach to learning, training, and development. So let's dive in. Welcome to part 3 of our series on mastering the art of global learning. And so we've covered some interesting topics already in the first couple of episodes on this topic, and this one is going to be a little bit trickier and require a little bit more depth of thought. And I think the operative word here is balance. You have to find balance between global need and local need. Mm-hmm. And there are times where everybody in your organization, no matter where they are, have to do the exact same thing in the exact same way. There are other times when there's some variability, right? And you could, in the United States, you could develop training that's got 12 different cultures in mind.
It gets a little unwieldy.
It does. Like
Right,
how many
right.
versions of this?
Right,
And every time you make a version, it's like making the old mimeograph copy, right? Mistakes start getting in there and it gets all fuzzy and blurry. So let's talk about what you mean by balance. And then we'll talk about some ways of thinking through some of the challenges of that. So Lana, I think I'm going to ask you first.
Okay. Well, as L&D teams, we're often standing in the middle of two opposing forces, and we're trying to grip the reins on both sides and keep the balance. And it's not an easy chore. Sometimes it feels impossible, to be honest. But just trying to balance these opposing forces.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In a perfect world, each person would have their own custom learning program.
Personalized,
Personalized
Just to
learning
them.
program.
Sitting at the feet of the teacher who knows you well.
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't happen. So then
Right.
we try to reuse and get as much mileage as we can out of our learning materials. And if we take it too far, then what you've done is watered it down to the point where it makes no relevance to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you're rolling it out, and you're
And it
trying
could
to.
be dangerous,
It definitely could be
right?
dangerous.
Or it could distinctly affect quality.
Yeah.
I mean, you think of global organizations like McDonald's, I think everybody gets trained the same way to do the same thing every single time. Doesn't matter what culture you're in. So you can travel anywhere in the world and a Big Mac tastes exactly like a Big Mac no matter where you go. There may be some variability with that, but not much.
Yeah.
Not much.
So you want content that's adaptable, able to adapt to as many audiences as you can, but it also has to be relevant. And so that's one of those
hard.
tug and
Yep.
push and pulls that we feel.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? It really does take a bit of an art to pull that off.
It starts with some definitions, because it has to start with some definitions. And the definitions are, and part of the balancing act, right, the old judicial thing of local versus global needs. How do you go about making that determination? Ultimately, who decides? And I've told stories in previous podcasts of, in the first experiments with multinational companies, particularly in the United States, did a terrible job. They totally ignored any local need, any local distinction. How do you go about figuring that out, or even define what the difference is between a global need and a local need?
I think you need to look at your individual learner. So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said define. If you don't even know what they are,
Right.
then you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to balance that tension.
How many are you really on this topic? There may only really be like 3, or there could be 15, depending on the topic and the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So understanding who your learners are and what their needs. So really diving into that learner profile, and then what are their needs, like you said, within that particular topic? And what are the differences? So if you have 3 learner profiles, are they pretty much all the same except for one, or are they vastly different? Again, relating to this content, what are the differences that you see between your learner profiles? If they're very, very, very different, then you may be looking at
3 different.
3 different
Yeah.
curriculums.
Yeah. It's a lot of work to do that. It's a lot of expense to do that, and a lot of time. So as you're balancing, part of the balancing is you're balancing, reward versus risk.
Yeah.
You're doing a cost benefit analysis, basically saying, well, yes, it's going to cost us this, but the risks, these risks are going to be mitigated and these benefits are going to show up. How does a learning team walk that path and identify what the risks are if something isn't properly localized?
So if you've already identified your learner needs, and you've also on the other side, let me do that again, and you've also on the other side identified your corporate needs, because they can be very, very different, then you want to go ahead and look at your risks and think, and this is, some people naturally think worst case scenario. I am definitely one of those people. But think worst case scenario. If we don't localize and train properly, what are the risks? Are there safety risks?
Right.
Is it a medical device where there's huge risk
Yeah.
for lack of training?
Right.
Is it a call center who's completely damaging the brand and reputation of your
Right.
company? So what are the risks? And I like to put it in a simple numeric formula where you assign a number 1 to 10. How likely is it to happen?
Right.
And then if it does happen, what is the outcome?
Kind of a
How
weighted
terrible?
scorecard. Yeah.
And so then you can fairly easily assign a risk to, and you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
I really love your example of, a call center, because that we've all been on, calls that are difficult, and they can severely damage the brand and, people's willingness to, it can be really severe. But people don't always, think about that. And if your
Right.
call center is offshore or somewhere else, like, that's a huge risk. It could also be a lot of work to create localized materials, but
Right.
it's worth it. And you're really thinking about priorities, right?
Right.
Like,
Yes.
what are the priorities in
Right.
this instance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to we're going to talk about one of the key parts of this, which is involving local resources in this decision, because they have things to say and things we can learn from. So we'll be right back.
Imagine a world where every training session, every learning module, and every translated document is aligned with your company's unique goals and global ambitions. Welcome to Ingenuity, where we don't just talk about elevating your corporate learning, we make it happen. At Ingenuity, we understand the heart of your business is its people. That's why we specialize in creating custom learning solutions and translation services that are not just effective, but are designed specifically for your business's global needs. Let us show you how learning cannot be just better, but measurably better, with solutions tailored just for you. Learn more in the description below.
Welcome back, everybody. So we've been talking about when to tailor a learning experience to a particular culture, or how many versions of it do you need to create. And in this section, I want to talk about, when do you involve local experts? So not just everybody sitting in headquarters somewhere in southern Jersey, but when do you involve people who are outside the United States, people who are going to be deploying the training, taking the training, the learning experience, or in some cases defending it.
Yeah.
So what's the pathway to their involvement?
I think it's really important. We talked about assigning a risk value if it's not done well. So, and taking into consideration the corporate needs and the individual needs. So that really is going to alert you as to how much emphasis, priority this project is going to have. And on the high priority cases, that's where you want to go deeper, get more stakeholders, get more feedback, make it more custom so that the targeted results are going to be there for you. It's not going to be a general.
Do you ever do like an early adopter type of thing? Do you ever think through like, okay, let's run this, let's take, some local resource that we have in wherever, in Belgium or something, and let's have them take 10 people through it and get their feedback. Does that kind of test? It's hard to do because it adds time and complexity and another revision cycle and potentially a branching scenario now where you've got, one for here, one for... Right. What are the factors that you would need to consider to do something like that?
Are you talking about a pilot group?
Yeah.
So again, the high-risk projects that it's critical that you do it correctly.
So it's mission critical. The risk is high. Maybe also high visibility. Like everybody's got their eyes on whether or not this is going to work. It might be a highly expensive form of training. There's probably some factors like that where you need to think, okay, but you build that in way back in the beginning.
In the design.
Even like in the kickoff where lots of people are paying attention, risks are very high. Even when we're thinking about how to scope a thing like that, those are conversations that are happening quite early.
Right. And then it's good to consider that not the whole program maybe necessarily has to be custom.
Oh.
So you're still wanting to get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah.
So in the scoping process, if you're mapping out your curriculum, you're designing what can be the general that a larger population could take potentially, and then as it gets more and more specific and more high risk, that's where you are really making it custom and maybe making it a complete game or whatever is warranted for the level of risk.
Well, you always talk about, especially in e-learning, it's very easy to design like learn more boxes or drop down. And, we've even at Ingenuity, we've designed whole dashboards that are, to start with, you pick your region of the world, you pick your role. Well, all of that's really pulling from the same sort of pool of content, but then we have scenarios maybe are the only thing that's written differently. Or we have glossaries to help people in certain parts of the world where the terminology may be more difficult to translate. But it's largely the content's the same, but we have the ability to specialize in certain areas to make it still have that personal feel.
Yeah.
And that makes it very specific to your learner, but also adaptable so that it can be used by more than one team.
Yes.
All right. Let's talk finally about sort of weighing continuous feedback and improvement. Where does the feedback cycle come into play, and are you doing regional comparisons? Because it's a little late at that point, honestly, right? If you're getting, but it's something you have to look at, because if it's all aggregated into the same data set, you got a solid B minus, but that might mean a third of your learners said it was a D.
That's terrible, right?
Right, and some of them said it was an A. So, how do you know how to do that, and when to do that?
You definitely want feedback from your learner, so you have to have a mechanism that's gathering all of that feedback. And then, as you said, you're going to want to evaluate depending on where they're at and what their role is. Feedback is tricky because you obviously want to take it all with a grain of salt. So you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
And
which is a horrible idiom, by the way.
But
anyway, I'm sorry, you're doing what?
Right?
To the baby? Right, yeah.
It is. And you don't want to just take something because something new was proposed. So it is balancing that tension of keeping what you have. An adopted standard is better than a standard that's better but not adopted. So keeping what you have, but also allowing for continuous improvement.
Yeah. And there, I think, again, it's a word we've used often in this series, but relationships. If you have a trusted relationship with somebody in that location, you can call them and say, wow, our feedback here is not good. What did we miss? And one of the risks and costs of not doing that is over time, you may develop a situation where you have one really good, healthy learning culture
Yeah.
and one absolutely awful
Yeah.
learning culture. And within the same company organization, you may have 10 of those if you're not really paying attention to the regional features of each one. Well, Miriam, as always, glad to be on this podcast and this conversation. And Lana, thank you for your thoughts throughout this series. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Before we wrap up the show, if you're looking to dive deeper, we've got tons of free downloads, L&D resources, and details about upcoming webinars that you won't want to miss. They're found in the episode description. Plus, if you ever want to chat with either one of us, now's your chance. You can find links in the episode description to connect directly with Miriam or me. We're here to answer your questions and to discuss all things learning and development. And speaking of questions, we love hearing from you. Whether it's a question or a comment or a topic you're curious about, or if you just want to join the conversation, drop us a comment on your favorite social media channel. Your input shapes our shows. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. It's the best way to ensure you never miss out on our latest episode. We're excited to continue to transform learning into a measurable success with you. Until next time.